A caregiver webinar. It seems more and more of us are facing the prospect of taking care of our loved ones, so we want to provide you with some information that will help those of you who are and will be facing this situation soon. A couple of things I want to remind all of you. If you could, please put your audio on mute, unless you're obviously Kiana or Jeb. And we will get to a Q&A section later in our program. So if you will put your phone, excuse me, your Zoom on mute, we would really appreciate it. Secondhand, we will also be taking questions at the end. If you'd like to put those in the chat as we go along, you are welcome to do that, and I will be reaching into those later on in our program. So to get us started today, we are excited to introduce our guest speakers who are certainly familiar with this subject, not only from a caregiver's perspective, but from the business side as well. To start off with, we have Kiana James, class of 2003, who graduated from Bauer College here at the University of Houston. Kiana is the founder and CEO of Friendly Faces Senior Care that provides non-medical in-home care in Houston and surrounding areas. And she is joined by Jeb Bashaw, class of 1983, who is also a Bauer College graduate. Jeb is the founder and CEO of financial services firm, James Bashaw and Company. And to get us started today, I see the smiling face. She's got her cap on and she's ready to go. I want to introduce to you Kiana James. Kiana, it's all yours.
All righty, I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. So give me 1 second. And I hope y'all are doing well today. Okay, I think we've got it here. So as introduced, my name is Kiana James, and I'm a proud graduate of the Bauer College of Business. I graduated from the Wolf Center for Entrepreneurship way back in 2003, and I am currently serving on the advisory board for the Bauer College of Business. The name of my agency is Friendly Faces Senior Care, and I started that agency way back in 2010. And I'm very, very active in the Houston community. I'm also a resident of Pearland, so I'm active pretty much all over Houston. I'm always doing a lot of different things. So that's just a little bit about us. This is an independent agency, which means it's not a franchise. This is my baby that I created myself and built it up myself. And what we do is we provide personal assistant services to primarily seniors, and we're encouraging them to be able to live in their home as independent as possible. So this is just showing a little bit about our agency and what we do. We do specialize in working with those who have some form of Alzheimer's or dementia. We also work with trying to reduce the risk for falls in the home and also the risk for rehospitalizations. I always like to touch on my why whenever I'm doing a presentation. This is a picture from my college graduation. So when I graduated from U of H, I love parties, very sociable, threw myself a big old formal. And that was a picture of my grandmother. We called her Mama Doll, and she lived in our home until she was 91 when she passed. And I got to watch my mom take such great care of her, being the primary caregiver for my grandmother. And she never had to actually go into a facility or nursing home ever, which is pretty remarkable. And then also, this is a picture of my father. He is currently 91 and he has later stage Alzheimer's, but he's still moving around. But those two individuals are my why I do what I do, and taught me a lot about senior and senior care. We do serve the entire city of Houston and surrounding areas, and we have been recognized with a lot of different awards that I'm very proud of. And that just talks about our rate sheet. So I'm going to talk about 3 different things today. I'm going to talk about at home versus facility care. So what that means, I'm going to talk about how to effectively screen when considering at-home care. So we're going to talk about independent caregivers versus using an actual agency. And then ways in which you can be proactive versus reactive when it comes to senior care. Now, all of this is so very important because there's so many families that are having to care for their loved ones. And most time it's on a reactive state versus proactive. And so that's why U of H thought it fitting to talk about the subject of caregiving because it's something that's so needed. And many families are finding themselves in what's called that sandwich generation, where they're caring for their loved one, but they also are caring for their children at home. So it's kind of like a double whammy of caregiving responsibilities. And it can be very taxing and can really lead to what's called caregiver burnout. So we want to provide as much information as possible on a proactive basis, just so that you can be prepared when it comes to caring for your loved one. So I don't know the demographics of everyone that's joining us today, but just knowing the industry, I would assume there are some that are joining us that are already in the process of caring for their loved ones. And there are some that's just kind of gathering information in the event that they do have to care for their loved one in the future. So I want to welcome you all. So when you're trying to make a decision about at-home care versus facility care, what it comes down to is most seniors want to stay in their home. If you took a survey of seniors, people don't want to leave. There are some that's okay with leaving, but most of them want to stay in their home. What it usually comes down to when I talk to people is about budget. So budget usually dictates primarily if they're going to stay in their home or if they have to move out. And so if they want to stay in their home, then you need to look, are they going to stay by themselves? Is there a family member that they can stay with? A friend? Is there somebody they can have a roommate? What type of care would they need? Are they pretty independent? Do they just need a little assistance? Or they're in a state where they need round-the-clock care? That's very important to look at, because if they're in a state where they need more help and they don't have the budget, it may be more reasonable for them to go into a facility. So then if they're going to go into a facility, you need to decide, okay, what type of facility will they need to go into? And so if you take a moment, just look there, you'll see the different types of facilities. So first you see an independent living facility. We use a lot of acronyms. So you'll see ILF, ALF, SNL, SNF, or SNF as we call it. An independent living facility would be usually the first step. So it'll either be like an independent living facility, or sometimes you'll see those active aging or 55 plus communities. It's usually the first step that a senior will take when they're starting to need some care, but they really don't need a whole lot of care. You have to be relatively independent in order to live in those type of facilities. Usually they'll provide some type of meal, and there's a community of other independent seniors that get together, they do activities. In each of these categories, the seniors usually don't want to go to the next category. So they usually don't want to go to independent living, but they'll compromise and go. And then as they start needing more and more care, then you have assisted living, memory care, and skilled nursing. So when you're dealing with assisted living and memory care, you're going to have a nurse on site. Somebody's going to be watching and checking on them periodically. And then when it gets down to things like a skilled nursing facility, many times that's funded through the government, where you're going to have that long-term care and they'll have a higher acuity level. And then what's really popular, many of you guys may know about, is called a personal care home. So basically the home that you're living in, somebody can rent those out to seniors. If you have over a certain number of residents in the home, then you actually have to be licensed. But there's many personal care homes right now that are operating without a license. They don't even have to be licensed because they only have maybe 3 to 6 residents or something like that. They're an affordable way, and it's a smaller, quaint type of situation. So for many people, it's a good solution for them. With all of these things, you have to be very careful. You need to look at reviews. You need to interview the management company to make sure of how everything will be. Now, when it comes to screening, effectively screening. So you have the option of using a PAS agency or using an independent caregiver. So these are some of the questions that you need to ask when you're looking at an agency primarily. So how long has that agency served the community? Does the agency have a brochure describing services and costs? Many times that might be a telltale if they don't have a website, they don't have a brochure, maybe they're just getting started, maybe they've been in business a while, they don't have any of that together. To me, that would just be concerning. Do they have a license to practice? This is the state of Texas that we're talking about. PAS agencies are heavily regulated in the state of Texas. They're not in all states. Most states do have some type of licensing. In Texas, we do. So that would definitely be a question that you want to ask is, do they have a license? How closely do supervisors oversee care to ensure quality? Are agency staff members available around the clock? So if there's an emergency that's happening and I call them, am I going to be able to reach someone from the office, or is it just going to be a recorder? Because caregiving is 24/7. So if I have one of the caregivers in my home and there's an issue or something like that, can I reach them? How are the caregivers screened, hired, and trained? What is the agency's process? Another next very important is the agency bonded and insured? Again, you don't want a fly by the night agency. You want someone who is insured, bonded, licensed, have put the time and investment to set up a real business. And that way they're going to have those type of protections that you need, because they are caring for your loved one. And these are essentially strangers that are coming into your home. So you want to make sure you do your due diligence. Many of us have seen the videos online on the news where the seniors have been taken advantage of, and we don't want that to happen. And I'm moving a little fast because I got a lot of information in a short amount of time. So there's also another more cost-effective option, which is hiring an independent caregiver. And so again, budgets usually dictate what your choices are. And so many people are comfortable with managing that process because it's a lot that you have to do as the caregiver or the family in order to set up independent caregivers. And so independent caregivers, you want to ask such questions as, and you want to interview these people because again, you are serving as the employer. And the reason why it's so important that you serve over the employer, if you pay that caregiver over like $2,100 a year, you have to be the employer. If you do not, and there's a lot of people that will pay under the table, you can actually get in trouble with the government, and you don't want to do that. You can start, if they found out, you can have to pay back taxes. We've seen things in the news about, I don't know, politicians, they didn't pay their nanny, or they paid their nanny under the table, they weren't an employer. It can lead to lots of issues, and you don't want that to happen. So you want to make sure you set this up correctly. You serve as the employer, you deal with the taxes, insurances, all of that. You want to see what is their expectation of a pay rate. Can they provide references? Do not skip that step of references in a background check. That is so important because again, there's nobody governing these. They don't have to be approved or licensed by the state to be an independent caregiver. There's basically no oversight except for the family. You have to be careful when it comes to this stuff. So don't skip that. There's many places you can go online like care.com in order to find a caregiver. And what I like about that portal is it allows you to do the references and the background check as well, which is nice. You would want to create a contract between you and that caregiver. And then you want to look at the different responsibilities as a new employer. Be careful with that step. Again, you want to make sure everything is done correctly. Now, proactive versus reactive. This is very, very important that, again, I'll just touch on this. That's why we're here, because I always tell people you want to set up a system before you actually need it. The majority of people that come to us, the calls that we get from families, They're having that oh crap moment because mom or dad are in the hospital. They're getting ready to discharge home. The hospital will not let them discharge home without a proper care plan in place. So what do we do now? So before you get to that step, you want to do your research. You want to find out about the different care facilities. What's the budget? Does mom and dad have some type of long-term care plan that can supplement and help to pay for care? You want to look to all those things. You want to talk with your loved one, find out how they feel. If they're cognitive and have the ability to be in that process of making that decision, you definitely want them on board because this is their life. Many of them have been proactive and already know, I never want to go in a nursing home. I have this amount of money saved up. I want to stay in my home. Some are like, I'm very sociable. I'm lonely here. I lost my mate. I want to go into a facility. You want to keep care continuous. So once you notice that they need some type of care, that's an indication that you want to keep that care going. If you want a proper care plan in place. And eventually they'll need more and more care and you adjust accordingly. Consider care in respect to future decisions. So again, being proactive, finding out, especially there's a big prevalence of Alzheimer's and dementia. So while your parent is cognitive, you never know if they could start to lose that cognition. You want to know as much information as possible before they get to a point where they really can't make decisions. Because you as a loved one have a very heavy responsibility when you're caring for someone to make sure that you're doing things according to their wishes. And then this last one was just talking about packing a to-go bag, because many seniors are at a point where they might fall, they have to go to the hospital in and out, and it just makes it really easy to just pick up and go, especially if you start running into those situations where your seniors are being hospitalized multiple times. And this was just a word from me. It says at Friendly Faces Senior Care, we do things the friendly way. We are committed to great customer service for both our clients and employees. We look forward to working with you to customize a plan to fit your exact need. Let one of our friendly caregivers help you. And that's my presentation for today.
Way to go, Kiana. And what a great picture on your presentation, by the way. That's a great picture.
So much. I appreciate
So I know we're going to get to Jeb now. I have so many questions in the Kiana space, but I'm going to save them all till the end because I know Jeb is going to jump in here and handle the part of this presentation that he handles. As I mentioned at the beginning, Jeb is a class of 83. We are actually longtime friends and compatriots. We're actually fraternity brothers from Jeb. I'm going to tell you, it's damn near 40 years ago, but let's not talk about that. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to Jeb for his portion of the program. He's going to unmute himself. And again, folks, if you have some questions, if you'll put them in the chat, I'll try and get to those at the end. Jeb, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. Carolyn, do we have my slides loaded? Can someone run those for me? Since I'm class of 83, I'm slow on technology. Look at that. How exciting. I want to talk. Can anybody hear me? Am I good to go, Mike? Good. Just real quick, just a little bit about, good, thank you. Just a little bit about me. Mike said class of 1983. We were fraternity brothers and had a great time at the university. And I really, first of all, before I even get started, I want to say that if you wonder if there's saints among us, Kiana is one of them. This caregiving business is not just a business. It's a love, a thing that these people do. And Kiana and her firm are fantastic at it. I can tell you, I know friends that have used their firm, become highly recommended, and for all the right reasons, I would definitely explore someone particularly like Kiana, because she is the real deal. And she talked about her whys, and I'll just tell you my own personal why. My wife died about 7 years ago. She had a disease called Huntington's disease, which you may or may not have heard of, but it's a terrible disease, and frankly, there's no cure. It's a neurological disorder, and so I had to make some of those hard decisions that Kiana talked about, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit in my presentation. So let's go to the next slide. You got it? Oh, good. We got it up. Cool. Next slide. Great. Here's a real quick question, and the question has always been, who has long-term care coverage? And the answer is everyone, because if you don't have it, it's your net worth. And as Kiana described, it can be a very, very expensive process, and there are lots of ways to insure around it, just like you'd insure against loss of your home, your car. Long-term care is one of those things that we really advise you to take a look at. It's not inexpensive, but it's cheaper than, it's always easier to use the insurance company's money than yours. And we can talk about specific cases in that in a little bit. So next slide, please. Here's kind of the hard math. Every day, 10,000 people turn 65 in the United States, and that's where these baby boomers are running through the system. And as Mike said, we've been friends for 40 years. I'm not 65 yet, but I'm a lot closer to 65 than I am 45. And so it's one of those concerns that you have to take. As most of you know, Social Security and Medicare start at 65. That's no surprise, just for those of you that don't know how the government works. They started Medicare back during the Social Security Act, and the reason they picked 65 was because back then the average life expectancy was 67. So they hoped that half the people would never use it, and so that's why they picked age 65. So today, 30% of people that are alive will never need long-term care. So that's the good news. The bad news is that 70% of the generation will need it, and of that 70%, 20% will need it for more than 5 years. And back again, to kind of compliment Kiana, I can tell you have better outcomes when you have a private service like Kiana than if you just put your loved one in a nursing home. The average time in a nursing home is about 30 months, and that's not because they ran out of money, it's because they ran out of life. So Kiana and her team do a great, they improve the quality of life as well. This shows you kind of what the costs are. If you're able to keep a loved one at home, that is always the cheaper option. It's about $54,000 a year. If you have to put them in a full-time, either assisted living or a nursing home or a memory care unit, that can run as much as $105,000 a year. So it is not an inexpensive activity. But as I said, in-home is cheaper and a private home would be the most expensive. But the most important thing, and Kiana talked about this when she talked about her grandmother and her dad, it's not always about the money, it's about the quality of life. And that's one of the things that we really stress when we have these conversations with clients and friends. Next slide, thanks. So what are the next steps? And Kiana talked about it again. You have to start the dialogue now. You do not want to be put in a position where you are making real-time decisions because you've had a crisis. Somebody's fallen, they've had a wreck, they've had a healthcare issue. That's just the wrong time to do it. I would argue my wife, we knew was at risk for Huntington's. Her dad had died of it. And so we had the conversation really back in our late 30s. And so I had the chance to get ahead of that, and we bought long-term care insurance back then. I can tell you it was a lot less expensive back then because back then folks didn't know what the outcomes were. But frankly, it probably was a huge benefit to my family and I as we went through this process. My wife and Kiana talked about this idea of long-term care is really speeding up, and that's not in a good way. What's happened is younger and younger people, I think the incidence of dementia and Alzheimer's in people under 60 has increased about 300% in the last 10 years. And we don't know why, but it doesn't really matter why. The answer is that's the reality. And so I'm sure Kiana could to testify the fact that a lot of her clients are younger and younger than they used to be. This is not just an old person problem, it's an all the person problem. So that's one of the things to do. As I said, what you want to avoid is a crisis decision. And so the best way to do that is to get your ducks in a row right now. If you have an attorney, if you need a referral, we can give you one. But the main documents you need are a power of attorney, and that allows your loved one to make business decisions for you in the event they're incapacitated. Healthcare power of attorney, which allows you to make healthcare decisions. We would always argue get a will. You know, about 70% of people die without a will. So the suggestion is, if I get a will, I'm going to die. It's actually the inverse. If you don't have a will, you're much more likely to die. That's a little bit of those are called lies, damn lies, and statistics, but that's the reality. And then have a directive to physicians. And that just tells your loved ones and the doctor what level of care you want in the event you're in a long-term chronic situation. And it's basically a do not resuscitate order. And you want to make sure that you have that conversation. No one wants to live life as a vegetable or in some, where the quality of life has gone down so far, they're being kept alive supernaturally. So it's one of the decisions we ask people to have. And then the last one is beneficiary designation. Look at your IRAs and your life insurance policies and make sure that those are up to date. One of the things we've seen in our practice over the last 30 years is someone gets a divorce, they don't update their IRA or they don't update their 401k. and their previous spouse is listed as a beneficiary. So that is the governing document, regardless of what your will says. So make sure you update your beneficiary designations as required. As an example, if your husband or loved one were to die, you want to make sure those contingent beneficiaries, maybe your children, step up. So those are all the important things. Of the other factors to consider, and we've talked about this, keeping a loved one at home is always the best response, I believe. It's a place they're familiar with. It improves their quality of life. They get a better quality of life, and they generally get better outcomes. And the second thing I really want to talk about in a little bit of detail is this idea of caregiver stress. I lived it. You know, a lot of folks you talk to in my business will tell you, they can kind of give you the math. I can tell you from an emotional standpoint, caring for a loved one is really stressful. And it's one of the casualties of caring for loved ones. So and there's been a bunch of studies done on this, and physical, mental, and emotional stresses really can take a caregiver down. And in my case, I had 2 kids in college, so I didn't want them to have to come home from college and take care of their mom. So I did it, and I brought in help, and that's even hard. So if you don't have somebody like Kiana in your corner, it's really a challenge. 40 to 70% of caregivers suffer from depression. I did not, fortunately, at least I didn't think I was depressed, but it's a stressful time. And most of the folks who have caregiver stress generally have high blood pressure. I did get that. That may have been my eating and drinking habits with Mike, diabetes, and a compromised immune system. And we saw really during COVID how important that is. If you've got a compromised immune system and you bring that COVID into the family, that can really put a lot of stress on the loved one. So make sure you're aware of those things. Next slide. 11% of caregivers state that their role has caused their own physical health to decline. And that's really when you start to see a spiral down in the caregiver relationship. 45% of caregivers historically have reported chronic conditions, including heart attacks, and that really changes the dynamics of the family. If the caregiver has their own problems and you have to start bringing in outside family members, that can really put a lot of stress on the family. Caregivers have a 23% higher level of stress hormones and a 15% lower level of antibodies. So that shows you the actual impact of what this caregiver stress can do. 10% of primary caregivers report that they are under physical stress, and that can be as simple as just having to lift a loved one and put them in a wheelchair, get them in and out of the shower, get them in and out of the bed. All those things contribute to that fact. And here's the most important statistic. And women who spend 9 or more hours a week caring for their spouse increase their risk of heart attack by over 100%. So it's really, this is a real life situation. And I would make sure for those of you that have someone in that situation, please take care of yourself. And those of you that know someone, please give that caregiver all the love and support, because they're the ones that are doing it on a day-to-day basis. Next slide. So how do you fund all this stuff? Well, number one, as I talked about at the outside, you can use your personal assets, and that's a very expensive activity, but if that's what your choices are, you have to do it. 2, you can get long-term care coverage, and we can help you with that on an individual basis, and happy to do so. There's no charge for that. We're happy to show you what those policies look like. Number 3, if you have life insurance, a lot of them have what's called a chronic care rider. So if your loved one has life insurance and they enter a situation, a lot of times you can get a upfront money from the life insurance company. Typically that runs about the patient has to be within 2 years of a terminal illness, but that's one of the things you can look at. And so that's really a really good and inexpensive way to do it. As I talked about earlier, you can take money out of your 401k or your IRA. And again, that's why that beneficiary designation ultimately is so important. And then 5, and this is the least, in my opinion, the least palatable, that's to use government assistance. You can get Medicaid for nursing homes, but I can tell you that the money that Medicare gives you will not put your loved one in a nursing home that you would want to go into yourself. So I would use that as a very last resort. But of course, again, many times that's a situation. As always, thank you. I love the university. Thank you for including me today. I'm happy to answer any questions. We're available for a private consultation, and my email, jeb@jamesebashaw.com, was there. And then we offered the Right Capital, which is a service you can download from our website and use to make some of these financial planning decisions. So it's free at this time, and so we're happy to do it. So Mike, that's all I've got. I hope I didn't hurry too quickly, but I wanted to leave lots of time for question and answer.
I haven't seen you talk that fast since you were trying to get yourself out of trouble. That was interesting. Yeah. So no, thank you both, Kiana and Jeb, for such a great presentation. We are now open for some questions for a little bit of time. You know, we leave the amount of time here that everyone wants to discuss, and we block off an hour. We don't always make it to the top of the hour. Sometimes we have gone over. We do have a couple of questions on here. I mean, I don't even know where you start, but we'll go into Deborah's question right off the bat. She asked, you guys probably see the chat. Are there long-term care insurance options for people who already have serious health issues or genetic predisposition, excuse me, big word, for dementia? Kiana, do you want to take a shot at that? Who wants to take a shot at it? Make sure you unmute yourself. There you go.
I should not. That's not my specialty.
Okay. Jeb, do you have a thought about that one?
Sure, you bet. Actually, the insurance companies have gotten pretty wise to this. A lot of them will screen out they'll ask you the incidence of, in our regard, Huntington's in the family, because that is truly a genetic disease. But I know that they'll ask questions about Alzheimer's. If you already have, as I said, a life insurance policy in effect, that's probably your best choice, because they're really not, the insurance business is the law of large numbers. So what they want to do is charge 1,000 people and pay out on one, not unlike they do in the car business or your life insurance or your home insurance business. So unfortunately, there are not many choices unless you have a pre-existing life insurance policy that you can draw down on.
Great. So again, we have some space for some questions. I'll ask one to kind of keep the question going. Kiana, I'll ask you more of a non-specific question, but when they call you, what do you think is the number one thing people are forgetting to do in this situation when they're thinking about, senior care or becoming a caregiver? What's the thing they're thinking about the least that happens the most?
I would just say not being prepared. Again, as I said earlier, it's just usually reactive. They don't know the pricing. They didn't know their budget. My recommendation is to understand your budget. Many times, and that can be difficult because if your parents are fully functioning, they may not talk to you about budget. So the adult children has to usually step in at a later time. They have no idea how much money mom and dad have in their savings, what type of retirement plan, do they have long-term care insurance? They have none of that information. And many times, because mom and dad, they're holding on to that information. You have to have that conversation in advance because you need to know how to properly plan. So many times they call, the first question they normally ask is, how much does it cost? And then I'll tell them, and many times people are like, oh, okay, yeah, we can do that. But they haven't really calculated. I can usually tell by talking and tone, and I can ask additional questions. Okay, yes, it's $26 an hour, but how much care does your loved one need? And sometimes we figure out they need like 24/7 care. And I say, okay, just want to make sure you understand that's going to be anywhere from, I don't know what it is now, 16, 17,000 a month. And then there's a reality check. They're like, oh crap, what do you mean? That's ridiculous. And that's how much it costs. So is this something that's within your loved one's budget? And many times they're like, well, I have no idea. Or sometimes they'll say, well, they just have Social Security. Social Security is not going to cover that. So then you have to have that card conversation. If they truly need 24/7 care, and many times they do, okay, what are our options realistically?
Yeah, it's a tough spot, right? And some people just aren't prepared to it. And then all of a sudden it happens, right? And then you're in that space, and you, even in your own space, right? You as the parent in your 50s, right? Or 60, whatever you might be, you would do your children a favor to be preparing this yourself, right? That would be the proactive thing to do for those of us that are aging in the generation, would be to set this up so that you're educating your kids that you've already set up your long-term care and not have your kids chase. Would you agree with that, Jeb, that a lot of people they're indestructible, right? It's not going to happen to me, and I'm not ready, and I'm not having a conversation with my Jeb Bashaw about setting up my long-term care, when you as the parent now could actually be helping your kids, for you not to burden them by setting up your 401k or your retirement to pay for your long-term care when it happens. True?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the challenges of dealing with the what we call the greatest generation, of those people that survived everything from the Depression to a World War, and they just kind of think, well, I'll live forever and I'll take care of it. And they're pretty tight with the information. We have a book actually, which I'm happy to send everyone. It's called A Family Love Letter. And if you'll send me an email, I can send you one. But it's a great series of topics to talk through with your loved one, or at least give it to them. And it's important for them to know that you care about it. You're not trying to get in their business. That's their number one takeaway. Kiana's probably seen that before. Why do you want to know all this stuff? Well, I'm not really because I may have to take care of you, and I'm not trying to get in your money or your business. I just need to do that. And it's a hard conversation to have. I think folks, my kids are in their 30s, and I've got a plan laid out for them. And part of that plan is fully funded. So that takes one pressure off of them. But Kiana can tell you that the biggest challenge for families is having a qualified person like Kiana's firm, because caregivers have their own problems too. So if you think you've got round the clock help and you get the call at 7 o'clock in the morning, hey, the 8 to 5 person's car broke it down. If you don't have a resource like Kiana, all of a sudden you're back in the caregiver business from 8 to 5. So all those things impact not only the family, but the caregivers. So I'm very, very, that's why I keep pounding on this, because you can have the hard decision now, you can have it later, and it's not a very good conversation to have later.
So we have two questions that are similar, so I'm going to kind of merge them. So this won't surprise you, right? How do you talk your mother? Well, we even put parents, we'll take into allowing someone into their home if they're super independent, right? These Texas women are super independent and they don't want anybody coming into their home. And they're not very mobile and needs daily support. How long, or they do have long-term care but won't use it? And then Giovanni asked the question, so on the same topic, basically on how to introduce this topic to your parents. Do you recommend waiting for them or bring it up or should we as kids be more assertive? Who wants to take that question? Because it sounds like an assertive kid question, meaning to what Jeb was just talking about. You've got to have this, hey, dad, mom, you may not want to have this conversation, but we're about to have this conversation because I need to know what your wishes are. Do you want to be at home? Do you want to be in a place? Do you want to be, pushed off a bridge? I'm joking that, but it's like, how do you want to have end of life, right? Even the cremation or burial conversation, all of these conversations have to happen. Kiana, you want to take how do you encourage your parents to make this decision?
This is a very hard one. We run across this a lot because they don't want to make that decision. They're the parent. They tell you what to do. You don't tell them what to do. And I don't understand that now, but I can only imagine being in that position. I would be like that too. So I would recommend having a lot of patience, because it's very hard to get them to do something. They are in denial. They don't need help. They're fine. And most time, the adult kids have no idea how bad it really is. We get a surge of calls after the holidays when people have been together and, sometimes they don't always get to spend as much time with their loved one, and they look and they see, oh man, mom and dad has really gone down, or my aunt or uncle. And then they're trying to find help. So I would say go over there unexpectedly, check things like the cabinets, the refrigerators. Do they have a lot of expired food? Check their medication, kind of sneak and do it. Are they taking their pills? Things like that are telltale signs. Is their house clean? Is it cluttered? Those are telltale signs that they may need help. Many seniors are just functioning. It's really sad, but many of them are just surviving and they really need so much help. They're afraid to ask for help because if they do, they feel like they're going to end up in a nursing home. I try to tell my seniors, you just got to give up a little bit of your independence so you can hold on to as much independence as possible. And so many of them, again, it takes them falling, ending up in the hospital before they accept that help. And you don't want that to happen. So be patient. Now, a roundabout way of doing it, which I like to do, is go through their doctor. Have a conversation with their doctor beforehand, before they go in. If you can get access to their doctor, let them know the situation. Many times they'll listen to their doctor versus their kid. And so the doctors can make those recommendations. There's been times when the situations are so bad where we or the family, or I've had to recommend to the family to get APS involved, which is Adult Protective Services. Because if that senior is cognitive, they can technically make their own decision and just stay in a bad state if they want to. It's their right. So putting a little heat on them, depending on the situation, we've had cases where APS has had to come in and have those hard conversations with those seniors, which will then prompt them to put something in place. And many times it is a long process, starting with little step. Okay, sometimes they're just going to come here to clean your house. A lot of times they will accept that, and then you gradually add more and more. Patience. Patience,
exactly. And now I see Elisa's face on the screen. Hi, Elisa. We met in LA this past week. We were just in LA, and she's dedicated Cougar. She came in hot from a trip, right? And we're here, right? We're going to show up. So we said we're going to show up. We're going to show up. So I didn't pick on you because you had a question. I picked on you because your face showed up on my screen. So good to see you. The question here, because it goes to my next segue here, which I thought I handled very well. Lisa's out in the LA area. Any guidance or suggestions on when an elder parent has to maybe move across country to be closer to the children? And we're in this kind of, how do you talk to your parents place too, right? Any guidance on if either you've had to do that, or some suggestions on how to, when they have growing cognitive issues and is living alone and facing a cross-country move to be near their adult children? Thoughts there?
Sure, Mike, I'll jump in. One of the things, and to kind of key off of what Kiana said, how do you start the conversation? Well, blame it on us. Blame it on, say, I was on this, this will be recorded. You could actually send this to your loved ones and say, hey, I was on this really interesting thing today. And I just want to throw it out and see what they say. I mean, that's the easiest, least volatile way to get involved. A second one would be blame it on Mother Nature. One of the things we see, particularly, I've lived here my whole life. I was shocked at how crazy everybody got 18 months ago. We had the big winter storm, but what comes out of these winter storms is these shut-in loved ones end up dying in their home because nobody's checking on them. And as Kiana said, it sounds sneaky, but look at go through, make sure they got food, make sure they have canned goods, make sure that all those things are up to date, their drugs are up to date, because those are easily done. And then the third thing we do in our business, everybody has what we call a trusted person. So if we see someone in our business making change, let's say as an example, we have a portfolio set up and it's all high quality stocks, and they start trading cryptocurrencies, that's a pretty good indicator to us they might be heading in the wrong direction. So those are the things you do. And to your question about a loved one being away from home, that's where that trusted person, you want to keep them in their home. You don't want to have to uproot them and move them from Texas to California or California to Texas, but you need to have a trusted person in that person's life just to go by and check on them. And it's hard. It's an unfortunate part of us growing old, but it's one of those conversations I believe you have to have. And I would say on Kiana's comment about the doctors, absolutely dead on right. It was easier for me to convince my wife that she could no longer drive when she heard it from the doctor. I think if I had told her, that would have sent her into histrionics. But when the doctor said, look, it's no longer, you can't drive anymore, and Jeb's going to bring in a driver, I got to, that she took a little bit of heat from me, and that was a big help because we had to make the decision. My wife had about 7 car accidents in 12 months, and those were all directly related to her Huntington's disease. So those, and by the way, and the doctor can explain, hey, look, the reason we're doing this, not only for your safety, but for the safety of others in your net worth. So that's very, very important to have that conversation.
So again, we have just a couple minutes left. If you have a question, you can ask it here. I'm going to ask one here for Kiana and or Jeb. Jeb, you kind of touched on it in your own personal situation that, God bless you. I remember watching you go through that. So the support system question, how let's go downstream, almost like an org chart. You have the person affected here, then you have their direct spouse here, but then you have the children, you have the aunts, the uncles, the grandkids. How important is it to be transparent with your children, with the person you're giving the care for, so that everybody's in on a team effort? I mean, you went through this, but with your kids, this is what mom's going through. And because you're going to have to lean on them. It's the old adage, someday our parents become our children, right? And you need to be transparent with your own children, correct? That this is what's happening. This is what we're going to do. We're a team effort. It's not going to be pretty all the time, but just give me some of your personal experiences in that space and what you thought was most important to share with your family members so that you weren't kind of hiding that you were the caregiver, that everyone knew this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it. And that transparency is so super important. And either one of you, I know, but Jeb, you're the first person who brought it up, and I watched go through this years back. And Kiana, you can chime in after Jeb, but Jeb, go ahead.
Sure. Well, let me tell you, make sure everybody knows who the quarterback is. When you're the head of the family or the head of the situation, everybody's going to have an opinion about how you do things, and but none of them want to jump in the deep end of the pool with you. So make sure that you lay the law. I'm interested in your ideas, but at the end of the day, I make the decision. So that's number one. From a transparency standpoint, you need to do that. You know, one of the things that I found was your children are watching you, how you take care of their mom, their dad, their grandparent, and that's a big impact on them, because you want that person treated with dignity, not just shoved aside. Don't, try, as an executive, of course, like Kiana, I run my own business. So, you have to take off your business hat, because this is such an emotional situation. And people don't know what you're going through. You have to keep a smile on your face all the time. But I'll just tell you, as a caregiver, there are a lot of times I went home and just, wanted to curl up in a ball, because am I doing the right thing? Am I making the right decisions? And don't be so hard on yourself. I mean, the answer is you do the best you can in real time. If you have those types of resources like a Kiana, then that helps a lot. But at the end of the day, it is so emotional to make those decisions. But you want that next round, as you said, Mike, that next ring around us to know, hey, look, any help you can give me, I'll take. If you can just come by and sit for an hour on Saturday afternoon and watch TV with a loved one, that makes a huge impact on their quality of life. Or, hey, come by and bring them a bowl of ice cream, or bring them, a chocolate shake. I mean, they get tired of being insured and making those decisions. So make it fun. I mean, whatever quality of life they have, you want to make sure that they know that you still think their life is important and worth having. And so that the best way to do that is the ministry of presence. If you are there to be present for them, you'll manifest such a better outcome for your loved one.
Kiana, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, definitely. Many times, their families come to us and it's usually one main caregiver that's caring, regardless of if there's multiple siblings. If that, sometimes they're seniors and they have no one caring for them. So my suggestion, if you're in that position, or if you have a loved one and you're not the main caregiver and someone else is taking the charge, help them out. Look, don't think that they're handling it and they got it, because they don't. It's too much for one person. It needs to be shared. It needs to be a team. I don't see that very much. Sometimes we'll see where their siblings or the family get together, they share the load. Most time, I don't see that. It's usually, when it was my mom, she was the main caregiver. Right now, she's the main caregiver. When it comes to me helping with my parents, I have a sibling, I'm the main caregiver. So give that person the help that they need.
Excellent. We had one quick question in under the wire from Sandra, who asked if are there any resources for caregiving for disabled young adults who have aged out of the school system? Anybody have a thought about that one?
Sure. We see that a lot. We do a lot of planning for what we call special needs kids. The system is not set up. It's set up for 0 to 18, and then they kind of drop you in the grease. And so we have a lot of resources for that. Obviously, one of them here in Houston is one of the great ones, which is Brookwood. They actually have an independent living situation for those who have aged out. You can either go out there and be a participant on a day basis, and there's also obviously there's residential care. And which kind of reminded me, I wanted to talk about one other thing Kiana knows about the organization. There's an organization here in town called Amazing Place, and it is an amazing place. It is for young, what we would call young impacted folks who have dementia, Alzheimer's, really kind of the 55-year-old group. And it's basically a daycare center. And for your loved ones, it is a great place for the caregiver to drop them off. They give them a lunch and a breakfast. They have activities for them. I can't tell you what an invaluable resource that is. Again, that's not for this question, but I just want to make sure I got that out there. But Brookwood is a great example, and we have several others. If you'll email me, I'm happy to get those to you, because we're dealing with a lot of, as you know, autism has become a huge issue in this generation. And so there are lots of kids who are somewhere on the spectrum who may need that kind of extra level of help, and we're happy to make those referrals.
Great. All right, we have time because Elisa wants to make a comment, so I'm going to let her unmute and make a quick comment. Elisa, how are you? Thank you for being here.
Thank you, guys. Well, what I kind of sort of did was, for my parents, they made me, I guess, like, so like for their Medicare selections, or like their Medicare. So like on certain things, I'm on file to have access to discuss. So then with that, I'm able to, from California, they're in Louisiana. So I'm able to, when open enrollment comes, or like when doctor visits comes, or just certain things, whatever, I have access. But then when we did our trust, I guess like a lot of the things that we did in our trust, making sure that they had, but my mom is very like chatty Cathy, so she's already picked out her funeral, she's picked out and done a lot of like her stuff. So for me, it's one of those ones where I just went there February, and my order was all important papers. This is my spot. This is where I want them to be. So I guess on some of it, it's like I'm able to manage or maintain or just like figure stuff out, because I just started asking, like, I need permission. So then I don't need them to then give me permission, or like I need to run them down to like ask like what's going on with like doctor visits, or if it's hospital or whatever, because I, in a way, like tricked them. I got them. I got it. I have access.
All right,
So,
thank you. Thanks, Alyssa. Kiana wanted to jump in here before we run out of time. Kiana, you want
Yeah,
to jump in?
just quickly, that is so important to do, especially before they get to a point where they don't have the cognitive ability to give you permission. HIPAA authorizations, you definitely, someone asked about elder law, definitely recommend getting with an elder law, reviewing everything about your parents, putting those things in place, so when it comes down to it, you have that access. Very important.
Well, thank you guys so much. I mean, this is why our UH2U webinar series was created back during, we were getting ready to create it right before the pandemic hit, and it's been so valuable ever since to have two great alums step in the space and provide this invaluable experience and your thoughts. This is recorded. We actually get like 10 times as many people watch it on the recording as we do live. So it's an invaluable resource that will stay on our website for quite some time. So Kiana and Jeb, thank you guys so much. I know that you put all your information in the chat. We will also be sharing the PowerPoint presentations with our attendees here today, because we have you registered and logged in. We'll be sending that out to you, and you'll be able to find all the information you need to reach either one of these fine folks. And again, thank you all so much for being here. Kiana, best of luck to you, and go outside and enjoy the weather. It's a beautiful day. Keep smiling, right? What a great smile. And Jeb, I got plenty of comments for you, my friend. So anyway, you're a good man, and thank you for being here. On behalf of all of us here at the University of Houston Alumni Association, thank you for being here today, everyone. Please check us out at HoustonAlumni.com. Please join our online Cougs Connect, where all of our alumni have joined in, over nearly 3,000 alums in that space. It was just launched last year, and you can be a mentor, find a mentor, hire an intern, post a job, meet all of your alumni space. That's cougsconnect.com. So thanks to everybody for being here today. On behalf of all of them, I'll say good afternoon, enjoy the weather, and go Cougs.
Go Cougs.